Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about even more leaks regarding the 10th generation of Pokémon, which is expected to come out late next year for the 30th anniversary of Pokémon, and it's supposedly going to be called Pokémon Winds and Waves. Now, we've talked about this before. We've talked about a variety of things regarding the Terra leak. There has been a lot of information that's come out from internal documentation from Game Freak, and so we've learned a lot about different projects, including the 10th generation of Pokemon, perhaps the biggest project we've ever seen from the Pokemon series. And so we've already learned some cool things over the last couple months, but over the last week or so, during these holidays, we've gotten even more information. We've gotten footage of showing off the prototype of this game, and there are some very interesting, cool, exciting takeaways here, so that's what we're diving into today. But I will point out that I do have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers, so if you find yourself enjoying this video or some of my other videos, I would very much appreciate your support. Subscribing if you haven't done so already, liking, commenting, it all makes a big difference, but I at least thank you for coming by to watch today's video. So as a bit of a summary for those who have not been keeping up with the leaks regarding Generation 10, the code name for this game is Gaia, and supposedly the game is going to be called Pokémon Winds and Pokémon Waves. There will still be two versions. In terms of the setting, it's supposedly set somewhere around Oceania or Indonesia, where there are a lot of islands. There's supposedly a theme of infinity, and the gameplay is supposed to tie in weather effects, traversing the ocean, even deep sea exploration. Ride Pokemon are coming back, and a great deal of them, but it will not function like it did in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, or even in Pokemon Sun and Moon, but supposedly from what we've heard, you will ride around in some sort of floating scooter that can transform depending on the environment, and you will have some sort of tether to your Pokemon that will be carrying you around, kind of like a horse in a carriage. But there's supposed to be a huge emphasis on exploration and survival. Those are some of the general concepts we've heard so far. That's a little bit of a summary, but do keep in mind, a lot of this information is coming from internal documentation from a few years back. There is plenty of possibility that plans can shift and change, and so what we've heard so far, including the things we'll be talking about today, it may not be exactly the same come release. And also, there's a lot of people sharing out different bits of information from these leaks, and there's certainly some room for misinterpretation, and so basically, yes, take this with a grain of salt, even if it is based off real internal documentation from Game Freak that gives us some serious, significant insight into what Generation 10 will actually be. But there's been this screenshot floating around, which to me looks a little bit like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but at the same time, I do kind of see how it looks a little bit like a more scaled up version of Pokemon Sun and Moon. Now, again, keep in mind that this is prototype footage. This is not meant to represent exactly how the game is going to look. The functionality of this would be to test out structures and concepts and mechanics in the game. It's not meant to look like a very well polished, good looking version of the game. But it does suggest here that perhaps, since this is going to be taking place in a tropical setting with a variety of islands, not too different from Pokemon Sun and Moon, we could be looking at more like an open world, modern gen version of Pokemon Sun and Moon here, which I would actually love. Pokemon Sun and Moon, I think, is one of the better Pokemon games in recent history, even though by this point it's been nearly 10 years. But I really loved the exploration and the visuals and the overall gameplay loop for Pokemon Sun and Moon. I think it is one of the better Pokemon games. So to see that they may be going in somewhat of a similar direction, but in a more modern, expansive way, if executed well, this could be pretty awesome. Now, there's also been some beta footage going around. You'll see here this Pikachu is just morphing in form, very cloud-like. Supposedly, this may have something to do with the weather moves or the weather mechanics, and it might be tied into this concept of Majins, which may be imbuing powers to different Pokemon. When we think about the different mainline Pokemon games per generation, over the last handful, they've made sure to introduce some sort of unique gimmick, be it Dynamax, Mega Evolution, Z-moves, Terastallization. A lot of these have been changes to Pokemon that happen on a large scale, like Dynamaxing and Terastallization, the most recent ones. And so when I take a look at this, I'm kind of left to think that it may be something similar where they can cause changes to Pokemon that they can do on a wider scale with all the different Pokemon, or a lot of them, and it's somehow going to tie into having these new weather moves that are powers provided through these Majins, or whatever that actually ends up being. Now, there are some other screenshots floating around that seem to be showing off just stress tests for the game, where they're trying to do different things in the environment to see what the engine can hold up, and as you see here, we see a whole bunch of shiny Charizards, and they're all in one place, or we take a look here, there's a whole bunch of Pokemon with various scales and size going far back, and I'll say here, this to me is good news, because if they are testing around with playing around with scale, that's important, because there have been Pokemon games that have forgotten about scale. And so maintaining scale, I think, is a big deal, and I'm glad to see that here. I want Wailord to look like Wailord. I want Pikachu to look like Pikachu. I don't want them to be even close in size, because they absolutely should not be. But we're also getting some insight into the battle system as well. What people have been able to interpret is that the battle system seems to be an evolution of what we've seen from the Legends games. And this to me is extremely fascinating, because now that Pokemon Champions is coming out, where the competitive format will be focused on, that gives Game Freak more liberty to experiment with the mainline games. Now, yes, technically the Legends games are mainline games, but they're almost like a side series within the mainline series. But it looks like they are going to be incorporating a lot of new elements here that are evolutions or variations from what we've seen in the Legends series into the other mainline games. From this little bit of footage here, we can see that there is actually a cooldown very much like Legends, specifically like Legends ZA, but it's still meant to be turn-based combat like Legends Arceus. This is the way Ball Guy, who's considered to be a legitimate insider on this Pokemon information, describes it. The greatest example I can provide for this is a more seamless version of Pokemon Legends Arceus' combat. Automatically occurring battles, free roam movement with a plethora of additions from ZA, such as area of effect effects for moves. TLDR, it's turn-based, yes, and the best possible implementation. So, still turn-based, so you still have the turn-based mechanics, but they are incorporating a lot of other elements like area of effect attacks like we saw from Legends ZA, cooldown, being able to move around like what we saw in Legends Arceus. And this is exciting stuff. I'm definitely curious if they're going to maintain all of the other typical traits of Pokemon we've seen from the other mainline games, like abilities, for example, because we do not see those in the Legends games. If they're maintaining all that stuff along with all these other elements, we could be looking at some very interesting, complex combat in Gen 10. But also interestingly, Ball Guy teased something else, and people are interpreting this to mean that he is teasing voice acting in Pokemon Gen 10. And if we're actually going to be getting voice acting in Gen 10, that is a huge improvement. Now, I do not think they need to have voice acting across the board. I know that Game Freak is conservative with their budgets. All Nintendo games are conservative with their budgets. But I also don't think it's a reasonable expectation to think that every single interaction is going to be voice acted. But if at least the cutscenes, the main story moments, are voice acted, I think that would make for a huge difference in terms of it feeling like a captivating story. Over the last few generations, they've taken the time to animate the characters and make it look like they're talking. All that's been missing has been the voice acting. So it feels like the foundation's there, they just haven't bothered to hire actors and put in the voice acting into the games. They could have all this time and they haven't, but according to Ball Guy, or at least from what people are interpreting of this tease here, that may finally happen, which I think will definitely make for a huge difference in keeping myself personally immersed into the stories for these games, because honestly, over the last few generations, while I do notice that they are putting in more effort with the animations and how expressive the characters are, it's almost counterproductive because they don't talk. It's kind of jarring. So if they bring in the voice acting, it's definitely going to make it a lot better. Fingers crossed this actually happens. Now also, we've gotten a look at what may be the map of the game. And as you see here, there is a big central island, but there are also some fairly sizable islands around, and some smaller islands in between. And supposedly, the map we got for Scarlet and Violet is just about the size for the main island here. I'm not sure how much I trust this scale, but it would be suggestive that, yeah, this world is a lot bigger and more expansive than what we got in Scarlet and Violet. I personally find that hard to believe, but we did hear about how they want to have procedurally generated islands, so in theory there could be almost endless levels of exploration of new areas. Maybe kind of like what they do in No Man's Sky or what they will be doing in Light No Fire, but on a smaller scale. That could be an interesting way to send people out to find different items and a lot of other wild Pokemon, but all these procedurally generated islands, I would find it hard to believe that this would tie deeply to the story. From all the leaks we've heard thus far, I think the most exciting one, which I haven't brought up today, is just that supposedly they are making this Pokemon game on a new engine. I think over the last several generations they've tried to maintain the same engine and just kind of slowly update it, but that's caused a lot of issues and weird bottlenecks and performance problems, and them not really being able to make a game that meets modern standards. I still don't have much reason to think that the next Pokemon game is going to look so much vastly better and perform so much vastly better that we're going to be talking about this being on the level of fidelity as a mainline Zelda game or anything like that. But I also am optimistic that they are going to continue to head into a positive direction, and the games are going to run better, and they are going to look better than what we've seen before to a significant degree. I mean, while Legends ZA may have had a fairly conservative environment, it did run well. And so hopefully moving forward, performance is consistent, and we get to see some better looking, more detailed environments with more variation. But it's definitely some interesting stuff here. I'm very curious about the battle system, I'm very curious about the world and the skill and the level of exploration we're going to see. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.